Hello, this is Deborah Clay, author of The Borrowed Boy and Just Be, and presenter of Castaway Books. Each week I invite one of my favourite authors to tell me about the books that have inspired their life and influenced their writing. This week I'm joined by Kathleen McGurl. I'm delighted to welcome to Castaway Books today Kathleen McGurl to tell us about the books which have inspired her life and influenced her writing. I first came across Kathleen's books when I discovered The Secret of the Chateau, which I absolutely loved, because I'm a big fan of dual timeline novels. And Kathleen has been very prolific in her writing. She's written 10 of these wonderful dual timeline novels, so I've got more to read I'm looking forward to. I'm particularly looking forward to reading the most recent book, The Lost Sister, which came out in May. And in addition to writing these novels, Kathleen has also written 3 non-fiction works on the writing craft. And her very first novel was reworked into a novella, Mr. Cavell's Diamond. So I'm sure you'll tell us all about that when we go through talking about your book. So welcome, Kathleen.
Hi, Deborah, and thanks so much for inviting me on. It's just such a great idea for a podcast. So I'm really looking forward to chatting with you.
Excellent. Well, shall we go straight on in with the first book?
Yes, why not? Yes. So my first book, I think probably in common with probably 50% of your authors, I'd say, I've picked an Enid Blyton to start with. And the one that I've picked, and I had to think about this quite hard because I read nothing but Enid Blyton as a child, as so many of our generation did. But the one I've picked is The Mystery of the Secret Room. Now, I was a big fan of the mystery series and also the adventure series and Mallory Towers, of course. Absolutely adored all of those. But the reason I picked The Mystery of the Secret Room is because, I don't know if you noticed it, but there's, I don't know if you remember The Mystery of the Secret Room, but in The Secret of the Chateau that you said you read, Deborah, I actually borrowed a plot point from this Enid Blyton book for that. There's a bit in The Mystery of the Secret Room. I think the 5 children get locked into a room by some baddie. I can't really remember the detail, but what I do remember is that the key has been left on the lock on the outside. And one of the kids he always has everything, loads and loads of things in his pockets that will help him get out of all sorts of scrapes. And he pulls out a piece of newspaper and he shoves it under the door, and he pulls out a piece of wire from his pocket and he shoves it in the lock and fiddles about, and the key drops out onto the newspaper and he pulls it back under the door and they get out of the room. And in The Secret of the Chateau, I'm trying not to give away any spoilers here, but my main character does open a locked room in exactly the same way. And so that's why I picked that book for this talk, really.
I'm sure the idea of getting a key out under a door has been used in lots of different books and things. I don't think you're stealing anything. I think that's the only way you could manage to get the key.
Oh, anyway. Absolutely. I mean, it's obviously not going to work if there's carpet or if the door's too close, or a million reasons why it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work with the Yale lock. But I don't know. It's funny how, I read that when I was like 8 or 9 years old or something like that. And I would have read the book more than once. I read all of my Enid Blytons many, many times. But it just stuck with me all these years. And then as a writer, to find myself sort of thinking, oh, I'm going to just borrow that plot point.
Did it come after your person was, I won't give anything away, locked in the room? You thought, oh, I know how they can get out. Or was it in your head when you were plotting the whole story that it kind of inspired it?
It was I think it was, it wasn't right at the beginning. It was as I was writing, and I knew that there would be this locked room, and it was as I was sort of leading up to that bit. Yeah. And my husband had been calling it the famous Scooby-Doo adventure anyway, and I don't know, Scooby-Doo ended up being Famous 5, and then that made me think about the Mystery of the Locked Room, and yeah, it sort of evolved from that, really.
You're right about the Enid Blyton being popular first choice. The early books are very often come up as similar, but Enid Blyton influenced all of our childhoods. I think people that were born in well, I was born 60s, but 60s, 70s, you're probably younger than me, but it did. And even our daughter, who's 31 now, she grew up having the Secret Seven read to her. She loved them. But I remember when I went to stay with a girl who's, it was somebody who my parents wanted me to go and stay with. We didn't know each other very well, but I had to stay there for a little while, for a week, while my parents weren't around or something. Anyway, when I was so impressed, because this girl was an only child and her parents were quite wealthy, and she had bookshelves with all in pristine condition, all the Secret Seven, all the Famous Five, every set of Enid Blyton, all on her bookshelves. Whereas for me, I had to wait to go to the library to get mine out.
Oh, my mum used to buy them for me, and I loved that. She'd quite often come home and say, "Oh, I was shopping today and I bought you a treat," and it would be another book, and I would go and read it immediately, and 2 hours later I'd say, "I'll finish that, Mum." "Have you finished it already?" She'd think it would last me a week or something. But I read them over and over. I absolutely loved them. I went to the library as well, but the Enid Blytons I always wanted to own. And actually, I was talking earlier today to my son and telling him the books that I'd picked for this. And I said this one, and he said, "Oh, I think I read that." I said, "Have you?" I didn't remember that he'd read it. He said, "Yeah, you gave me a whole load of them at one point. I think I'd found them in my mother's attic and sort of passed them on and said, 'Here, you should read these.'" I didn't remember, but he did remember having read that particular one. So that was nice.
In some ways, Enid Blyton is dated, but I think they still bring, the books still bring pleasure to children, because it's just the mystery and the fast pace of them. They're exciting, aren't they?
Yeah, and they're always groups of kids out having adventures, and that's and so's Harry Potter, and so's a lot of more recent books, and that's what kids want to read. That's you don't want any pesky adults in the way, do you? You want children doing their own thing, solving the mystery, finding out uncovering the smugglers, or whatever was it, the Island of Adventure, I think that's got smugglers in or something. I loved all that. I mean, the children are never in any danger. Although actually, as an adult, when you read them, you think, "Oh, how are their parents letting them do that?" But they're just out there doing their own thing, having adventures outside, and that's a lovely thing to read about. So I think they are a bit dated of course they are in some ways, and they're definitely dated in the way it's always the boys, so the active ones, and the girls have to be looked after. But I suppose we forgive her that, because she was writing them 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago, I suppose, really. 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Tomboy George, to give this sort of more feminist side of things.
Yes, you have you're one tomboy. But they're great. Yeah, they got me into reading, and I read all the time as a child. I was always had my nose in a book, and I think my favorite days were if I had a couple of days off sick, like not the day when you're in bed and you really can't do anything and you just feel so ill, but the day or two after that, when you're sort of getting better, but your mum says you better stay off another day. Those were my favorite days, because I would just read, or I'd read book after book after book. Brilliant.
That's what we all need sometimes, is a duvet day, the book.
Sorry?
We all sometimes need a duvet day with a book.
Oh, yes.
The duvet.
Yes. Didn't call them that in those days, but absolutely.
Where were you growing up, and did you have any siblings?
I had one brother older than me. I still have one brother older than me. I grew up in Hythe, on the edge of the New Forest, so it's a lovely place to grow up, and it's not too far from where I live now. So it was, it's a nice place to be, and the New Forest was just there on our doorstep. Probably didn't appreciate it as much at the time as I should. But yeah, just a very ordinary sort of childhood.
I love the New Forest. We used to go there on camping holidays when I was a child, and seeing the wild ponies and deer and just around, just absolutely amazing. I haven't been for years. It's got a special place in my heart, the New Forest. Beautiful.
Yeah. It is lovely. I mean, we're on the edge of it now, on the other edge, and we go for cycle rides at the weekends into the New Forest. It's just lovely.
Yeah. So on to your next book.
Okay, so again, I've been perhaps a little bit predictable in that I've picked the book that I did for O level, as we called it in those days, or GCSE English, which is Jane Eyre. I think I suspect a lot of people picked their O level book, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and I did enjoy English lessons. I didn't have a very good teacher. He made it as dull as you could possibly make it, I think. But nevertheless, I did enjoy English. I certainly loved, if we were asked to write a story, I was in my element. I loved that. When I read Jane Eyre then, I remember thinking, oh, it's sort of a little bit dull. I wasn't mad on it. And then about 3-4 years later, I thought I should give this book a second chance. So I picked it up again, read it again, and absolutely loved it that second time. And then that set me off on reading as many classics as I could get my hands on. And I think at that time, we still had the net book agreement, so books were quite expensive. And when I was a student, I couldn't afford to buy too many. But then I think it was Penguin brought out a range of £1 classics. Yeah. And I just bought that brilliant, £1 a book, excellent, I can afford that. And I bought loads of them and just worked my way through all the classics. And I think that as a writer, that really helps you, because especially as I now write historical fiction, and I try and change my language for the historical parts of my books so that they read a little bit more as though they're older, as though they were written in Victorian times. I don't think I always pull that off, but certainly with the dialogue I try to. And having read lots and lots of classics, it helps you sort of have that ear for it, maybe. And I think also the other thing that was at the time when I was reading it the first time round, I sort of identified, I think, with Jane Eyre. She's plain and studious and just trying to do the right thing, isn't she? And I think that was me to an extent at that age. I was deputy head girl and looked on as the clever one in the class, and I never got a boyfriend in school. I had to wait until I'd met people that hadn't known me since I was a 11-year-old before anyone would go out with me. And so I sort of identified with Jane, and that's what I got out of it the first time around. The second time around reading it, I just appreciated it for the story that is in it.
It's a lovely story, and it keeps being picked. Your first two, not the Mystery of the Secret Room, but Enid Blyton is picked for the first, and Jane Eyre must have had at least 4 people have picked Jane Eyre. So. Well,
it's one of the ones that they always do for GCSE, isn't it? That one and Pride and Prejudice and The Lord of the Flies.
Mine was Far from the Madding Crowd, and I then read all of Thomas Hardy as a result of that. And then
I love
and A level was The Rainbow by D.H. Lawrence. So then I read all of D.H. Lawrence's work as a result. So yeah, I fell in love with those two. And also A level was W.B. Yeats, which I adored, and I can still recite and remember a lot of his poems. So it's really good English literature at school, isn't it? It gives you a good understanding and foundation for reading.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I didn't do A-level English. I really wanted to do A-level English lit, but I also wanted to do maths and physics, and that combination didn't work at the sixth form college that I was going to. It didn't fit in the timetable. You couldn't do it. So I reluctantly had to say, okay, I won't do the English lit, and stuck to sciences. And it was many, many years later before I sort of got back into my love of books and writing. Well, I always read, but it was not until my late 30s that I started writing. And I think if I'd done English Lit A level, I might have gone a completely different route and started writing a lot earlier. But
it's really interesting that your maths and science, and also your love of writing and reading, because you tend to find people are either one or the other, aren't they? I mean, I was always history and English, no good at maths. Science was a struggle, but it's funny that you've got both. It's great.
Yeah, and I remember I remember when I was doing my GCSEs and my A levels and doing all that maths and science and feeling, oh, I haven't got an artistic outlet here, and there's something wrong, I don't feel quite balanced. And then for my degree, I went totally left field and did social psychology. I still don't know why, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. I just didn't want to do maths and physics at that stage. But I ended up then working in IT. And funnily enough, IT does give you a creative outlet in a way, because I was designing computer systems and coding. And there is a creativity to coding in an odd sort of way that not everyone would get. But, you can write very elegant code or very beautiful code, find creative ways of doing things. And so that sort of helped to an extent, until I got to the point that I was just so itchy to explore the other side of me and get into writing, which I finally did in my late 30s.
I'm going to tell you a quick story because it's an interesting.
And I've never looked back.
When I was at school, I wanted to do A-level cookery because that was a subject I really excelled at. Because the only O-level I got an A in was my domestic science. I really wanted to do A-level cookery, but I was the only one in the whole of my year who wanted to do it, so I couldn't do it. And they said, well, you can't go on and do it at university. Anyway, I was telling this story to a fellow OT when I was about 20. Yeah, about 20. And this fellow OT said to me, oh, but you can do domestic science at university. My little sister's doing it. And she says that you can write recipes and you can, she's going through all the things you could do. And her little sister was Nigella Lawson.
Oh, my God.
Thomasina, her sister, who is an OT with me. And we were good friends. She'd been around to dinner with me and, we knew each other very well. And she was telling me all about her little sister, saying, well, she's doing it. I don't see why you couldn't have done. It just always makes me smile. I see Nigella on TV.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Sadly, I found out only through reading the front of one of Nigella's books that my friend Thomasina died of cancer when she was very young. So that was sad to find out.
Oh.
Yeah. So yeah, that's my little story. But you do wonder if you different subjects or taken a different path, what your life might have been.
Yeah. Yes, it's funny looking back, the choices you make, but all you lead to where you are.
Before we go on to your third book, I'm going to diverge one second to say, have you read The Midnight Library?
Yes. Matt Haig.
Yes, because I was just thinking, when you think about what might have been, the whole of that novel is about different futures you might have had, isn't it?
Yeah, that is a wonderful book. It's really life affirming, isn't it? It's kind of the book that, you've got any friends that are in any way depressed or down, it's like, read this, read it and you'll understand. Life is worth living, keep going. It's a wonderful book, it really is.
Don't regret anything, value what you've got.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So on to book number 3.
Okay, book number 3. We've kind of, in my life history, we've gone on a bit, but I need to come back for book number 3 because it's another book that I read in my teens or early teens, I think. So it's Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur C. Clarke. And again, I guess we're sort of showing that other side to me because that's a science fiction book. And I read it probably, I think on a caravanning holiday with my parents and my brother. And we'd all take, obviously, reading matter because our caravan holidays were always in Britain, so it always rained. And you stuck in a little tin box with your brother that you don't get on with all that well. And I didn't then. I get on very well with him now, but I didn't then. And I would read all my books in no time at all, and then I would just pick up whatever other books were lying around in the caravan. I used to read my brother's Commando comics. A lot of those I read. Mum's Catherine Cookson novels, whatever she had, and then whatever my dad had brought. And he loved science fiction, and that's when I got into reading science fiction then. And he thought, great, he bought me loads of science fiction books, and I read his copy of Rendezvous with Rama then, and absolutely loved it. I would read anything. And it's an interesting book because it's absolutely beautifully written. The descriptions are amazing, but there's really very little plot. And I kind of, or at least in the way I remember it, there's very little plot. And I think it's really clever the way it totally grips you and pulls you in, and you keep reading. And I've read it more than once, maybe 3 times, I'm not sure. And yet, when you look at what happens, there's a massive spaceship is detected that it's coming into our solar system. And its course is plotted, and they find it's not heading for Earth, it's just going to scoot through the edge of the solar system. And the scientists have got like years and years that they can work out, what its trajectory is, and they can get a spaceship that, a rocket or whatever, so that we can go up and intercept it. And I think there's some sort of little signal, just a sort of I'm here kind of signal coming from it, but nothing very much. But anyway, it comes past, we go and land on it. The astronauts go inside, and there's a whole sort of world in there. And basically it's an ark. It's got creatures that are in sort of suspended animation, and it's got a sort of whole jungle inside. And they finally work out that it's no threat to Earth at all. It is just passing through. Perhaps where it's come from, perhaps there's been some problem with their planet, and they've, this is to save their civilization and to go and find somewhere new to live.
And were the specimens creatures from a different planet, or were they ones that were similar to ours?
Completely different, I think, from a completely different planet. And anyway, eventually the astronauts sort of leave. They sort of leave like a note saying, we were here, lots of luck, that kind of, I don't know what it says. And they leave, and they come back to Earth, and it just passes on through. Oh. So there's very little plot, but it is an amazing book. It just really, just the whole idea behind it, and the descriptions are just beautiful. So I picked that really to show that I read everything that was around, and just as well because it's a book that stayed with me. I couldn't tell you the plot of any of my brother's Commando comics, but that one absolutely stayed with me, and I read it again many years later. I kind of feel I should read it again now.
I think I will have to now. It sounds wonderful, and it's interesting when you can get a simple plot but really well written, that you don't need to pack everything in the kitchen sink in, as some new writers believe, to keep the plot a really rich, a really heavy plot. A simple plot, well written. It's like food, isn't it? Simple food, well cooked.
Yes. And Arthur C. Clarke was just brilliant at coming up with plots that made you really think about, and some of his short stories do that as well, really make you think about our place in the universe, I suppose, or our place on Earth. And that one does. That one really does. It's great.
It's one that I'm going to have to read. What I found by talking to authors about their favourite books that have influenced them is there are a number of books that would be outside my normal interest, but they then make me want to read them. And I think I've got to read more widely and look at lots of these books. So that was still around your teens. And the other thing is, I was going to ask you about the links with your father through that, because I shared a book with my father I don't know, when I was about sort of late teens, early 20s, that got him back into reading. And I loved the rapport that we were able to then have over books. So I was just wondering whether that also made it special that you were able to talk to your father about these books.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, all of my family were big readers. We all read our own thing, and Mum always had a book on the go. Hers would generally be Catherine Cookson, that sort of thing, the sort of historical romances and sagas. And Dad always had a book on the go, and his would be the science fiction, or things like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I nearly put in as a choice. He and I shared the same sense of humour, so we would laugh our socks off over that. I remember him getting the Lord of the Rings books. Again, I was in my teens, and he read those and loved those, and then I read those. And my sons absolutely adore Lord of the Rings. And yeah, so we shared an interest in those kind of books, and we would swap books. I think throughout, right till end of his life, we would be swapping books. In fact, the book he was reading that was on his bedside table when he died of cancer, he was halfway through Bill Bryson's A Short History of Everything. Yeah. And the bookmark was in it. And I took that from his bedside table after he died, and I kept it, and I thought, well, I'll finish it for you, Dad. So I read that one next.
Oh, lovely story. Your story. It's a lovely story.
Yeah.
Wow. So your fourth book.
So I've gone for Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. Which was a Booker Prize. It didn't win. I think it was shortlisted. Should have won, I tell you. It is. I think it's probably the best book that's ever been written in the English language. That's my. I think it's so clever. Have you read it?
No. I did look up. I looked it up before talking to you. And it sounded, you'll explain it to viewers in a moment. It sounded so complex and kind of bizarre. I hadn't heard of it, but it sounds fascinating.
It is absolutely wacky in its structure. So there's basically 6 novellas in it. And you get the first half of the first one, which is set in 1850s South Pacific Islands or something like that. And then you get the first half of the second one, and then you get the first half of the third one, 4th, 5th, and then you get the whole of the 6th one. And by that time you're in the future. And then you come back down the pyramid, as it were. You get the second half of the 5th one, and then and until right at the end you get the second half of that first one. And it is and that first one, it actually, when you first read it, if you don't know that it's like this, you read it and then suddenly it breaks off mid-sentence, literally mid-sentence, and then you turn the page and you're on to not just a different chapter, but a different story set in a different time. And you think, what on earth this is? Have I got a duff copy of this book? That's what you think. And you're sort of flicking through, wondering what's going on. And it's only till you get probably into the third one that you realise where the little links are in them.
There are links. I was wondering about that. There are links.
There are links, and there is a phrase that comes up, I think, in the 6th one, in the middle of the book, and it's something like, I may not be getting this quote exactly right, but it's something along the lines of, "Souls cross ages like clouds cross the sky." Something like that. And then that's when you think, oh my God, that's what this book is about. It's about, the same sort of souls in one person and the next person and the next person in all these stories going through. And it's incredibly clever. And it's not just that each story is different and set at a different time, a different place, a different part of history, or a couple of them are in the future, but they're also written in a very different style. So that first one it's like a diary of a South Sea explorer, and then the next one, I think it's like 1920s or something, and the style of writing is completely different and fitted to each one. One of them he's got a whole load of made up words in, but they're clever made up words. So you know how we talk about a Hoover when we mean a vacuum cleaner?
Yeah,
and we've used the brand name, and he's done that to an extent. So people aren't wearing shoes, they're wearing Reeboks. But they're not taking photos with a camera, they're taking photos with a Kodak. So which is slightly dated now, isn't it? But since they've gone out of business, and it does a lot of that, and it's quite and then he's sort of turn some of these into verbs as well, as we've done with hoovering. You know, we talk about hoovering, don't we? And he's done that with you know, the person Kodaked a picture or something. It's very, very clever, and I absolutely love it. And I think what that book did for me, it showed me what's possible with fiction. I know there's a film of it. The film's okay, but it doesn't come anywhere close to the book. I think he pushed the boundaries so far with that book, and it just shows you what's possible. And you know, I'd never write anything anywhere near that, but it's just lovely having that out there. Something to just to be in awe of, really.
Yeah, sounds interesting. You haven't tempted me by it. I think I might find it frustrating. Nearest I can think to a book like that was The Golden Notebook, Doris Lessing. And I enjoyed parts of that, but I struggled with that because it was all different notebooks written in different bits. It's probably completely different.
Right, I haven't read that.
Liz.
It takes a bit of commitment. I think you have to sort of stick with it for 100 pages or so before you start getting into it and seeing what's going on. But I love it.
I should make my homework as reading. That's right. I'll make it my homework. So what was going on in your life then? Have you gone past your teens? Were you at work, uni, married?
Yeah, so at that time I was late 30s, married, young children, just getting into writing, I think. And I'd kind of worked out that there'd been this dream out there to become a writer. And then suddenly one day I thought, I suppose if I want to be a writer, I have to actually sit down and write. You know, that is the only way to do it. And I was a home worker then, and yeah, I just thought I should just try it. Really, sit down and try and write. I started trying to write a novel, which didn't get anywhere, and then I started the second one. And then I sort of got into writing short stories. So I think I was just probably beginning to find my niche my first writing niche, which was as a writer of women's magazine fiction, which is kind of where I started out. I think that's what I was doing around about that time. But it is a great book that I've read a couple of times. And again, my dad, who died far too young, but he said, life's too short to read a book twice. That was one of his mottos. And I've always stuck with that. And I thought, you know, a book has to be amazing for me to read it more than once, apart from all those Enid Blytons that I read hundreds of times. But Rendezvous with Rama and Cloud Atlas are two that I have read. I have picked up again and thought, yes, I will read this again. Sorry, Dad, I'm going to.
It's great by recommendation then.
Yeah.
So on to your fifth book.
Yeah, so my fifth book is The Legacy by Katherine Webb, which it was published 2010. And I came across, the reason I bought that book was it had actually been a winner in, there was a peer-reviewed website for sort of wannabe writers. It was funded by the Art Council called You Write On. It's not still going now, but I'd been a member of that as I was trying to write a novel then, and the idea was you put up a section of your novel, other people would read it and rate it, and maybe, you know, provide you some feedback and some comments. And the books that were rated the highest, there were some publishers involved in the site, and they'd take a look at those. And the overall winner was Katherine Webb's book, The Legacy, and she picked up a publishing deal on the back of that. And I then bought that book thinking, I want to see what kind of book, you know, what's the standard of the winning book here. And I read that and I thought, yeah, that totally deserved to win. It's such a great book, and it's dual timeline. And at that, I think before then I'd only ever come.
You've gone.
Timeline books, and by dual timeline, what I mean is a book where you've got two stories. You've got a historical and a contemporary story, and the stories are sort of interleaved. And usually there's a mystery from the historical story that is resolved in the present day. And I really love these books. They're sometimes called time slip, but to me, time slip is when a character literally slips back in time and finds themselves in the Dark Ages or whenever. Whereas a dual timeline, you haven't got that sort of supernatural element. You've literally got the two stories unfolding side by side, but some sort of links between them. And Katherine Webb, not all of her books are dual timeline, but she's a great writer. She's a historian, so she really knows the history that she's writing about. And her books, plus Kate Morton's books, Kate Morton also writes dual timeline, they just really got me into that genre, so much so that when I was trying to come up with a novel that might actually get me a publishing deal, that would be commercial in some way, I thought, well, I love reading dual timeline. Why don't I try and write one? And so I did. I came up with the plot for the Emerald Comb, which is my first dual timeline. And yeah, my idea for that was it's genealogy based, and they always say when you're researching your family history, there's always a danger you might find skeletons in the closet. And I thought, what if you actually found skeletons buried in the garden of a house where your ancestors used to live? That's what got me going on that. So I had the story of what led up to that skeleton being there and who it was, and then the contemporary story is how the characters sort of moved back into that house and how that skeleton was discovered and all the stuff going on in their lives as well. So once I'd written that and I got my publishing deal, I can't stop now. I just keep writing dual timeline. I love writing them.
I absolutely love Katherine Webb and Kate Morton, and that's what led me to read your books. And you didn't disappoint. You're along there with them. So great.
Thank you very much.
It's difficult though, isn't it? Finding a novel that you sort of what you want to write that is also fits a genre that's going to be popular to be published. It's a battle I've been having with myself because not trying to fit into a genre when it kind of goes against the grain it's quite hard. So you were very sensible to take a mature approach. Well,
I think write what you love to read is probably one of the best pieces of advice for any writer, because if you don't love reading the genre you're trying to write in, I think that'll come across. And I don't think you're not writing from the heart then, are you? Because if you don't love that genre, it's not going to work. I love I've sometimes asked would I ever write anything other than dual timeline, and my answer to that is always that I would write pure historical. That's the only other thing I'd write, because that's what I like to read. I can't imagine writing a purely contemporary romance, because it just wouldn't work. I wouldn't get it right at all. Maybe I just live in the past too much.
You enjoy the research part of it?
Sorry?
You enjoy the research part, the history, doing the research?
I do. Funny you should say that, because the book I'm just started writing just last week, in fact, I'm absolutely loving the research so much for that. It's set where I live now, which we only moved here in December. Which is Christchurch, and I discovered that Christchurch has a real name for being a smuggler's town from back in the 18th century. That like almost at least half the population of the town was involved in one way or another in smuggling. And the more I found out, I've got a load of books on local history from the library. Even when the library was closed, you could do a click and collect sort of service, and they dug out all the local history books for me, and I went and collected them. And the more I read up on that, the more fascinating it is, so much so that even though I'd pitched a couple of other books to my publisher, I had to write and say, can we leave those for a minute, because I really want to write this one. I want to write about smugglers in Christchurch, please. And so that's what I'm doing now. And yeah, I'm absolutely loving this research. It's not always as fun as that, but like The Secret of the Chateau, when I wrote that one, I'd kind of thought the historical story in that is the French Revolution. And I had thought, well, I did the French Revolution in history O level. I can remember what happens. That's fine. And then I thought, well, I better just brush up on it a bit. And then when I started reading up on it, I thought, oh, it's really complicated and political. and that was harder work doing that research because, trying to find the interesting bits, but cut through the sort of politics that I didn't want to get too involved in. But yet cover enough that you've got to get it right, and you've got to keep your readers interested in that part of history, and hopefully inspire them to find out more about it. That research was much harder. This research I'm doing now about smugglers in my local area is easy and fun, and I'm loving it.
Look forward to reading that one too then.
So yeah, that'll be next year. They'll be out next year sometime.
Excellent.
But I've only just started writing it.
We won't ask you for the name of it because I don't suppose you've decided yet.
It doesn't have a title yet.
Oh, that's excellent. We've gone through all 5 books, so it just left for me to ask you about which luxury will you take on this island. Now, bearing in mind all the authors I talk to would want to have books and writing, so that's a given. So what would you like as a luxury that's not books or writing?
Well, you said that I'll be provided with a fat notebook and a supply of pens, but that's not going to work for me writing, because I can't write longhand. It just doesn't work. The magic doesn't work if I'm trying to write it. Plus, I can't read my own writing anymore. I need to type. I need to type to write. So I want my laptop. And with it, the entire internet, please.
That sounds a trick one, but why not?
And if I can't have that, I just want a supply of chocolate, please.
You can have both.
Okay, thank you.
You won't want to be rescued, though. Okay, been an absolute delight talking to you. I could go on and on, but I know that I have to cut short because otherwise my interest will keep me talking to you way past the length of the programme. So absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining me on my island, Kathleen.
Thank you very much for having me, Deborah. It's been lovely.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this week's episode of Castaway Books. References for all of the books discussed in this show can be found on my website, which is www.abrakdeborah.wordpress.com. It's the letter K and then my name, Deborah, Deborah. So until next week, goodbye.